He wrote, "The real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, that a financial element in the large centers has owned the government of the United States since the days of Andrew Jackson." Rick, you'd think that all the opposition to the Federal Reserve occurred between 1910 and 1913, but that simply isn't true. Some members of Congress have spoken out against it in the years since, but to no avail so far.
That's right, Dick. Louis T. McFadden, a Republican representative from Pennsylvania and chairman of the House Banking and Currency Committee, minced no words in his condemnation of the Federal Reserve in 1932.
Mr. Chairman, we have in this country one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever known. I refer to the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks. The Federal Reserve Board, a government board, has cheated the government of the United States out of enough money to pay the national debt. The depredations and the iniquities of the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks acting together have cost this country enough money to pay the national debt several times over. This evil institution has impoverished and ruined the people of the United States, has bankrupted itself, and has practically bankrupted our government. It has done this through defects of the law under which it operates, through the maladministration of that law by the Federal Reserve Board, and through the corrupt practices of the moneyed vultures who control it.
Then, in May 1933, Congressman McFadden brought formal charges against the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve Bank System.
As a result of his outspokenness, however, the congressman became a marked man. During his chairmanship of the Banking and Currency Committee, there were 3 attempts on his life as described in the following article, which appeared after McFadden's death.
Now that this sterling American patriot has made the passing, it can be revealed that not long after his public utterance against the encroaching powers of Judah, it became known among his intimates that he had suffered 2 attacks against his life. The first attack came in the form of 2 revolver shots fired at him from ambush as he was alighting from a cab in front of one of the Capitol hotels. Fortunately, both shots missed him, the bullets burying themselves in the structure of the cab. He became violently ill after partaking of food at a political banquet at Washington. His life was only saved from what was subsequently announced as a poisoning by the presence of a physician friend at the banquet, who at once procured a stomach pump and subjected the congressman to emergency treatment.
While visiting New York on October 1st, 1936, McFadden died suddenly at age 60 of what was reported to be, quote, heart failure sudden death after a, quote, dose of intestinal flu, according to his death certificate. This was rather suspicious, and some historians feel that he was poisoned again. But without court-ordered forensic pathology tests, we'll never know the truth.
That reminds me of the Credit River decision.
The one in Minnesota?
Yes. It took place in December of 1968, and the presiding judge was Justice Martin V. Mahoney. A local banker testified about a mortgage loan given to the defendant, Jerome Daly, which Daly said the bank had financed by creating the money and credit upon its own books by bookkeeping entry. Well, Daly cross-examined the banker about the creating of money out of thin air, and the banker admitted that this was standard banking practice. When Justice Mahoney heard this, he said, "It sounds like fraud to me." The court's decision held that the Federal Reserve Act and the National Banking Act were unconstitutional and therefore void. This decision had the effect of declaring all private mortgages on real and personal property and all U.S. and state bonds held by the Federal Reserve, national and state banks to be null and void.
That case could have emancipated the entire nation from personal, national, and state debt that's supposed to be owed to the banking system.
That's right, Dick, but it didn't. Most people have never heard of the Credit River decision. 6 months later, Justice Mahoney was found dead in what appeared to have been a fishing boat accident, but his body had been pumped full of poison.
And so, the bankers continue their plunder unabated. Isn't it astonishing how people who oppose or expose the bankers' fraud are eliminated? When you connect the dots, is there any question as to who orders and pays for these removals?
Watch the whistleblowers to see which ones are attacked. It's a good bet that those who are attacked or eliminated were getting too close to the truth. It's no wonder the bankers don't want their scheme exposed, Dick. In fact, the primary reason for the success of central banks in taking control of nations was and remains the widespread ignorance about central banking. In the 18th century, for example, John Adams said,
All of the perplexities, confusion, and distress in America arises not from the defects of the Constitution or Confederation, not from want of honor or virtue, so much as from downright ignorance of the nature of coin, credit, and circulation.
And the bankers have taken full advantage of that ignorance, Rick.
In 1903, Henry Ford said, It is well that the people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning.
Rick, time was when a U.S. dollar was a silver certificate, which meant that you could redeem it for its face value in silver. That's not possible today. Today, our paper currency is called the Federal Reserve notes, which have no intrinsic value whatsoever.
In modern money mechanics, the Fed uses the printed word to explain today's money, exposing the inherent fraud so brazenly that rather than dare challenge it, one shrugs his shoulders and regards it as being perfectly acceptable. That's what I call hiding in plain sight. But it's not acceptable, far from it. Fiat money is paper money that cannot be converted into precious metals such as gold and silver, but which is considered by the government as legal tender. Legal tender, which means that there is a law that requires everyone to accept the standard currency, is just as important to the bankers as the money having no intrinsic value. The money is worthless, and the public would reject it and want to use something of real value instead.
The Federal Reserve cartel would therefore collapse without the legal tender laws. The only way it can thrive is to force us to exchange its worthless paper money for real goods and services. Let's look at a few more facts about the Federal Reserve.
The Fed is a private banking cartel.
Our currency is no longer issued by our government. It is issued by the private banking cartel called the Federal Reserve.
The word federal is an insult to the intelligence of the American people. As we showed earlier, the bankers chose the word federal to make their central bank sound like it's a government agency. But the Federal Reserve is no more a part of the federal government than Federal Express.
Nor is it a reserve. Not 1 cent held by the Fed is the property of the United States government.
The gold stored at Fort Knox is the property of the American people. But during World War II, Fort Knox was modified to allow easy access to the main storage vault.
Beginning in 1961, gold began to flow out, and Fort Knox is now empty. Even after repeated requests by Congress and others for information about the vanished gold, the government refuses to provide it. But there is really no mystery where the vanished gold went. It is in the basement vault of the Federal Reserve Building in New York. It is no longer owned by the American people. It is now owned by a private banking cartel.
The names of the Fed stockholders are a secret. Even the President of the United States says he doesn't know who they are. The names of the bankers who own the Federal Reserve are a secret.
The Fed's meetings and the minutes of those meetings are not open to the public. The Fed has never been audited, and they have repelled all attempts to be audited. In 1967, Arthur Burns, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, made the astonishing statement that an audit would threaten its independence.
Dick, the Federal Reserve is a private banking cartel controlling this nation's entire monetary system, and yet even the president doesn't know anything about its stockholders? That's incredible.
It certainly fits in with the rest of the deception and duplicity surrounding the Federal Reserve.
Oh, now, Dick, the men who met at the Jekyll Island Resort represented the Morgans, the Warburgs, the Rockefellers, and the Rothschilds. They were business competitors, not associates. So why would they go into a joint venture with each other?
Not just with each other, but they also went into partnership with the government. So it was a banking cartel, a shared monopoly that was legalized by getting Congress to pass it into law.
So they got Congress to surrender its constitutional mandate to coin money and to turn that power over